The silent thermostat. On November 7, 2024, Tacoma, Washington witnessed a life sentence. Ethan Marlowe, 36, received life imprisonment after a jury found him guilty of murdering his 5-year-old son and attempting to murder his 3-year-old daughter with carbon monoxide inside the family home. But how does a line of digits on a thermostat screen become the most credible eyewitness? In the pre-dawn hours of February 14, 2022, firefighters entered a split-level house on South 48th Street after a neighbor reported a persistent alarm and no response at the door. A portable generator rattled in the attached garage. The interior door to the garage was closed. The overhead door was down. A toddler girl lay on a living room rug, cyanotic but breathing. Her older brother was found unresponsive in a bedroom. Paramedics recorded carbon monoxide at lethal concentration. The father arrived curbside minutes into the response, stating he had awakened to the alarm and had just returned from buying cold medicine. Body-worn camera captured him slipping a 9-volt battery into the hallway detector before asking a firefighter if the children were alive. The timestamp on the video would later matter. The day before, Marlowe had set the home's smart thermostat to hold a fixed temperature and disabled its adaptive ventilation routine. Thermostat logs showed a manual fan-off command at 1:58 a.m., followed by a sudden indoor temperature rise that did not match the furnace's cycle. Utility meter data marked a sharp electrical draw beginning at 1:54 a.m., consistent with generator startup. The first alarm call from a neighbor came at 2:27 a.m. A doorbell camera across the street captured Marlowe leaving the driveway at 2:31 a.m. and returning at 2:46 a.m. without entering the house. The generator continued to run until firefighters shut it down at 2:51 a.m. Marlowe's children had spent the evening eating pizza and watching a cartoon. Their mother was working an overnight shift at a distribution center. The father texted her at 9:19 p.m. that everything was fine and sent a photo of the children under a blanket. Investigators would later recover the original image with embedded metadata indicating it had been taken earlier that afternoon. The blanket in the photo sat folded on a chair when first responders entered the home. Marlowe grew up in Pierce County and worked as a field service technician. He married young, had 2 children, and moved frequently for seasonal contracts. Friends described a careful budgeter who tracked fuel receipts. In late winter, he was behind on a car loan and a credit card. He had recently increased a life insurance policy on each child, effective immediately, with a double indemnity rider for accidental death. The applications were signed 2 weeks before the incident. Identification of the perpetrator moved quickly because the scene contradicted ordinary accident patterns. A forensic fire investigator found no evidence the furnace had malfunctioned. Instead, fresh fuel vapors and soot marks traced from the garage to the threshold showed gas engine exhaust as the source. The home's CO detectors had intact test stickers, but the hallway unit's battery tested new. Its twin in the basement contained an exhausted cell dated 3 years prior. The thermostat's cloud account preserved a continuous log with user actions and exact times. Investigators used a search warrant to collect those records, along with the smart meter data from the utility. Digital forensics provided the spine of the case. The thermostat log showed someone present in the home had toggled settings at 1:58 a.m. using the wall unit, not the phone app. Marlowe's phone, however, registered movement on the kitchen Wi-Fi at 1:59 a.m., then disconnected at 2:31 a.m., aligning with his car pulling out. A gas station CCTV a mile away recorded him purchasing 2 energy drinks and a pack of gum at 2:36 a.m., and lingering by the coffee counter. The generator in the garage carried a receipt still taped to the manual. It had been purchased used from a classifieds marketplace 4 days earlier. A smudge test on Marlowe's hands taken at the scene reacted to gasoline residue. The same compound appeared on the garage doorknob and the hallway thermostat. Medical evidence narrowed the window. The coroner reported carboxyhemoglobin levels consistent with exposure beginning well before 2:30 a.m. The younger child's smartwatch, marketed as a kid tracker, stored heart rate data showing a steady decline beginning shortly after 2 a.m. Investigators also retrieved a micro SD card from a baby monitor camera that auto-saved motion clips. The files showed the living room detector flashing with no audible alarm until the battery was inserted during the response. Taken together, the timeline showed initiation of exposure while Marlowe was still in the home, and manipulations of ventilation and alarms inconsistent with a panicked reaction. On March 15, 2022, detectives arrested Marlowe on probable cause for homicide and attempted homicide. Prosecutors charged him as an adult with 1 count of aggravated murder in the first degree for the death of his son and 1 count of attempted murder in the first degree for the survival of his daughter, along with endangerment and tampering enhancements. Pre-trial, the defense suggested an accidental generator run during a brief power fluctuation, but utility logs showed no outage in the neighborhood. A motion to suppress the thermostat data failed. The court ruled the warrant particularized the account and devices to be searched. Trial opened in late September 2024. Jurors heard from a digital forensics examiner who explained the thermostat's event ledger in plain terms. The fan had been turned off at 1:58 a.m. Manual holds were set, and the temperature jumps did not match furnace cycling. A utility engineer explained smart meter curves and how the signature of a small gas generator appears on a home's load. Fire personnel described finding the battery in the hallway detector being replaced during the response. The medical examiner outlined carbon monoxide physiology and exposure profiles without graphic detail. The prosecution emphasized recently increased life insurance policies and debt. The court limited discussion to financial documents authenticated by the issuing companies. The defense called no expert witnesses on generator mechanics and relied on cross-examination to suggest uncertainty in timing. The jury convicted on both primary counts. The sentence was life imprisonment with parole eligibility after 35 years on the aggravated murder count, plus a consecutive term of 25 years on the attempted murder count. The court imposed no contact with the surviving child and barred profit from publicity. A victim impact statement was read by the children's mother through counsel. Post-trial, the defense filed notices of appeal challenging admission of the thermostat records and the characterization of the body-worn camera clip. The appellate court later affirmed, in a brief order, finding no violation in the digital records warrant and no undue prejudice from the footage's limited use. Marlowe is currently incarcerated at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla under a maximum security classification. Department of Corrections records list his earliest parole consideration in the late 2050s, subject to statutory changes and good time credits. He has completed intake programming and is restricted from any work assignments involving mechanical equipment. The surviving child resides with extended family under a long-term guardianship approved by juvenile court. The river that remembered. On August 4, 2024, Wilmington, North Carolina witnessed a life sentence. Daniel Keating, 41, received a life without parole after a jury found he murdered his 8-year-old son by staging a kayaking accident on the Cape Fear River. But how does a river outing with a father end with a heartbeat log that refuses to match the water? On April 2, 2023, Keating told deputies his son slipped from a sight-on-top rental kayak near Dram Tree Park around dusk. He reported choppy water, a sudden squall, and a desperate search. Patrol boats swept the channel through the evening. At first light, a capsized rental kayak was recovered against a piling, paddle wedged beneath a rope cleat. No child was found that day. Keating told investigators they had launched late, circled a marsh island, and were separated by wind. The timeline began to fail under routine checks. Rental records showed the kayak left the dock at 5:22 p.m., not after sunset. A park camera captured Keating pushing off alone, then returning 9 minutes later to lift a small cooler from his trunk into the rear tank well. He launched again at 5:41 p.m. with no child in frame. A fisherman's phone video from the Riverwalk at 5:59 p.m. showed his kayak gliding north with an unoccupied child's life jacket draped across the bow. The first 911 call came in at 6:32 p.m. Keating's phone showed him on the east bank at 6:18 p.m., then tearing away in his car at 6:26 p.m., returning 2 minutes before he dialed. The child's smartwatch, synced to a family account, carried the most stubborn record. Heart rate and step data ceased at 5:06 p.m. indoors on a home Wi-Fi network, with no subsequent GPS pings. The medical examiner later testified those values were consistent with death before the reported launch. A vehicle telematics ping placed Keating's SUV at the house at 4:58 p.m., the rear hatch opening and closing twice. Luminol revealed a faint cleanup halo in the cargo area. A forensic chemist confirmed chloride residue consistent with household bleach. Keating grew up in New Hanover County, worked sporadically as a small engine mechanic, and had separated from his spouse the previous winter. Court filings showed a pending custody dispute and late child support. In March, he increased a life insurance policy naming himself beneficiary, effective immediately, with accidental death double payout. He also searched for river depth charts, currents near pilings, and how long until body surfaces in brackish water on a home laptop the week prior. Identification and charging followed a month-long search phase. On April 24th, a side-scan sonar team located a weighted backpack resting in silt below a pier north of the park. Divers recovered the pack with a child's clothing sealed inside a contractor bag. A matching pair of ankle weights, their straps cut, was found in Keating's garage. Tool marks matched a utility blade located in his truck. The child's remains were recovered 2 days later, farther downstream. The medical examiner reported drowning as the final event, but noted ante-mortem bruising, inconsistent with a free fall into water and not consistent with rescue efforts. No gratuitous detail was released in court. Digital evidence formed the core. The smartwatch's final sync time placed the child at home, not at the river, at the hour Keating claimed they were launching. The rental kiosk's transaction log and dock camera refuted his account of timing and who was present. A toll reader recorded his car crossing toward the park, then briefly detouring through a hardware store lot where receipts showed purchase of 2 lengths of paracord and a roll of duct tape earlier that afternoon. Keating's car trunk liner tested positive for sodium hypochlorite. A stain matched the dimensions of the cooler seen on the dock camera. Prosecutors charged Keating as an adult with first-degree murder, child abuse resulting in death, and insurance fraud. A tampering count was added for disposing of evidence in the river. Pretrial motions centered on admissibility of the smartwatch data and the telematics ping. The court found the warrants sufficiently particular and the data reliable, noting a foundation laid by witnesses from the device makers and the rental company. The defense proposed an accidental fall, separation, and panic, arguing the smartwatch could have lost signal, but experts explained the stored values and the home network timestamps. Trial opened in late June 2024. Jurors saw a composite timeline: dock camera frames, toll captures, telematics, and the smartwatch graph stacked in sequence. A Marine officer described currents at that reach of the river and how a low-slung, sit-on-top kayak behaves in wind, explaining why a child falling nearby would likely be visible or audible to observers along the riverwalk at that hour. A forensic accountant walked through insurance documents and a payment ledger showing premium increases weeks before the outing. The defense cross-examined the sonar team and questioned chain of custody for the recovered backpack. The jury returned a guilty verdict on all major counts. Sentencing followed a week later. The court imposed life imprisonment without paroles on the murder count, with concurrent terms on the remaining counts, and ordered restitution to cover search costs. An appeal was filed challenging admission of wearable data and the court's refusal to sever the insurance fraud charge. The appellate docket remains pending, but the conviction stands. Keating is currently housed within the North Carolina Department of Adult Correction under a maximum security classification. Public records list him at Central Prison in Raleigh, designated for long-term medical and high custody inmates. The child's mother obtained a permanent protective order and a wrongful death judgment that will attach to any future civil recovery. The rental facility now requires in-person ID checks for youth equipment and retains dock footage for an extended period during the boating season. The house that turned its alarms off. On March 3, 2025, Milwaukee, Wisconsin witnessed a guilty verdict. Louis Aranda, 38, was convicted of 2 counts of attempted first-degree intentional homicide and 1 count of arson of a building for setting a night fire while his 2 children slept upstairs. But what drove a tidy row house to testify against its owner by the pattern of its own plugs, sensors, and smoke? The fire began just before 2:20 a.m. on November 9, 2023, in a 2-story home on South 16th Street. Flames climbed from the living room sofa to window drapes in under 3 minutes. A neighbor's doorbell camera captured a brief glow, then a flash as glass failed. Inside, a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old were pulled from an upstairs hallway by firefighters working through dense smoke. Both survived with treatable inhalation injuries. The children's father told investigators he had fallen asleep on the couch, awoke coughing, and ran out to seek help as the blaze overtook the room. He claimed he tried to re-enter, but heat forced him back. The house argued otherwise. A smart home hub preserved event logs even as smoke detectors blacked out. At 1:57 a.m., the hub recorded a manual command disabling mobile notifications for 2 connected smoke alarms. At 1:59 a.m., 2 smart plugs in the living room switched on simultaneously. The devices had space heaters attached, though the family did not routinely use them. At 2:01 a.m., the living room window sensor registered open, then closed 20 seconds later. Neighbors' cameras showed a hooded figure leaving the porch at 2:02 a.m., entering a sedan, and circling the block before parking 3 houses away with lights off. Aranda's car, with a matching dented fender, appeared on a city traffic camera at the corner a minute later. Aranda worked as a line cook and had split from his partner a month earlier. A temporary order granted him alternating weekend custody, but barred him from the home. Court records showed he faced arrears, and his name was not on the mortgage. 2 days before the fire, he purchased 2 plastic fuel cans and a bundle of starter logs at a home improvement store in West Allis. Surveillance captured him testing a smoke alarm in an aisle, then placing an identical model in his cart. He left with the items and a small bag of batteries. Investigators entered a room that still held its clues. A canine alerted to ignitable liquids near the sofa and under a rug by the front door. Laboratory analysis identified a medium-range petroleum distillate consistent with lamp oil or charcoal starter in those locations. Heaters found on the floor were plugged into smart plugs that had logged back-to-back activations, creating multiple ignition points. Both heat-scarred detectors contained fresh batteries, but were discovered with their alert volumes turned to test mode, a quiet chirp rather than a siren. The hub's app on Aranda's phone showed a "Devices Offline" banner at 2:04 a.m., consistent with the system losing power as wiring failed. Digital forensics continued outside the frame. Aranda's phone geolocation placed him near the house from 1:51 a.m. to 2:03 a.m., then moving in a loop around the block. The car's event data recorder showed a brief door-open event and a driver's seatbelt buckle at 2:02 a.m., aligning with the porch camera. A gas station receipt from earlier that night recorded a cash purchase of 2 gallons of gasoline. A store clerk later identified the same dented fender on a vehicle at the pump. A timeline charted by the fire marshal demonstrated flame growth consistent with accelerant use plus immediate supplemental heat. Charges were filed within 2 weeks. Prosecutors charged Aranda as an adult with arson of a building. 2 counts of attempted first-degree intentional homicide with a dangerous weapon modifier for use of accelerant, and child neglect. The defense moved to suppress the smart home logs as hearsay generated by devices. The court admitted them under a business records framework after testimony from the vendor about how logs are produced and stored. A separate motion attacked the canine alert. It was allowed with limiting instruction and paired with the lab confirmation. Trial began in late January 2025. Jurors were shown the hub's event stream projected in sequence. The moment notifications were toggled off, the instant both plugs activated, the window sensor blip, and the sudden silence as power failed. A fire dynamics expert explained how contemporaneous ignition points shorten escape time and how open then closed windows feed airflow bursts that accelerate burning. A pediatric pulmonologist testified to the children's inhalation injuries without gratuitous description. The defense called a consultant to suggest a heater fault could have ignited a cluttered outlet strip. Cross-examination highlighted manufacturer logs showing those plugs were switched on by a user, not by a thermal relay. The jury convicted on all counts. At sentencing, the court imposed 40 years initial confinement and 20 years extended supervision on each attempted homicide count to run concurrently, and 10 years on the arson count consecutive, citing risk to sleeping children and deliberate defeat of alarms. A no-contact order protects the children through adulthood. Restitution covers the neighbor's window damage and the city's fire response over time. Aranda's notice of intent to pursue post-conviction relief challenges admission of the device logs and sufficiency of evidence on specific intent. Briefing deadlines are set for late spring. Aranda is currently incarcerated at Dodge Correctional Institution for intake processing before transfer to a long-term Wisconsin facility. Department of Corrections records show he is ineligible for parole under truth in sentencing but may petition for sentence modification only under narrow statutory grounds. The children reside with their mother under a family court order that bars unsupervised contact and requires trauma-informed services. The house, rebuilt with a different floor plan, now uses hardwired alarms with battery backups and no user-accessible mute during the nighttime hours. The airbag that stayed silent. On May 19, 2025, Phoenix, Arizona witnessed a guilty verdict. Marco Estrada, 43, was convicted of first-degree murder, child abuse, and insurance fraud for staging a single-vehicle crash that killed his 6-year-old son on a desert frontage road. But how does an empty stretch of asphalt argue back when the car's black box calls out a lie? Just after 3:09 a.m. on January 17, 2024, Estrada dialed 911 from the shoulder of South 43rd Avenue near the Pecos Road interchange off Loop 202. He reported losing control on loose gravel, striking a culvert, and finding his son unresponsive in the front passenger seat. Responding officers found a late-model mid-size sedan nose down against a concrete headwall, airbags deployed only on the driver's side. The front passenger airbag remained suppressed. Skid marks were absent. A child booster seat, rated for older children, sat belted into the front passenger position. Estrada stood with a minor facial cut and abrasions on his knuckles. Paramedics declared the child deceased at the scene and transported Estrada for evaluation. The culvert's edge showed a clean, centered impact. The preceding evening set up the route. Surveillance from a gas station on South Central Avenue at 9:42 p.m. showed Estrada placing a small tool roll and a fuse puller on the sedan's hood before fueling. He left alone. Traffic cameras later captured his car looping the same deserted frontage segment twice, between 1:47 a.m. and 2:31 a.m., each pass slowing near the culvert turnout. At 2:56 a.m., he exited a motel lot on Baseline Road with the child in pajamas. A clerk's security feed showed the boy carried, not walking. Estrada's sedan headed south. Vehicle telematics pinged cell towers along a direct path toward the interchange. Estrada grew up in West Phoenix and worked as a delivery driver, switching fleets after a layoff. He had separated from the child's mother the prior fall amid disputes over support and parenting time. In late December, he increased his auto and life insurance coverage, adding an accidental death rider for a dependent with Estrada named beneficiary. He also financed the sedan privately 3 months earlier, carrying a high-interest note with a delinquency warning issued the week of the crash. Friends described him as mechanically handy. No formal training appeared in records. The identification of intent started with the car's data. Investigators obtained a warrant to download the event data recorder. The black box showed throttle at wide open from 3:08:26 a.m. to impact, engine speed rising, and brake application at 0 until 200 milliseconds before the crash pulse. Steering angle remained steady as if aimed, not correcting from a slide. Occupant sensor readings recorded a low weight value in the driver's seat during the final seconds and a high weight value in the front passenger seat, indicating a smaller person drove and a heavier person rode right seat, an inversion of expectations. The front passenger airbag suppression status read on, consistent with a child occupant or manual defeat by seat sensor manipulation. The driver's side pretensioner fired at impact. The passenger side did not. The driver's seat track position was logged close to full forward. Physical evidence reinforced the mismatch. Crash reconstruction found no yaw, scuff, or deceleration marks typical of loss of control. Gravel at the apron had not been displaced in an arc. Instead, a straight set of tracks led from the lane to the culvert, with equal pressure on both the front tires. The booster seat showed strap imprinting inconsistent with a properly belted small child. Its shoulder belt had been routed behind the seat's shell, a misuse that allows forward excursion. A cut zip tie lay beneath the passenger seat alongside an unplugged occupancy sensor jumper harness. In the driver's footwell, officers recovered a short length of wood wedged near the accelerator hinge. A fuse panel diagram in the glove box bore a fresh crease at the airbag circuit listing. Digital forensics provided chronology and motive. Estrada's phone held searches from early January for how to disable passenger airbag, EDR what records, and culvert crash speed. He had watched a video about pulling airbag fuses and a crash test clip showing airbag suppression with child seats. Location history mapped 2 late-night practice loops on the same frontage road days before the event. A motel reservation showed a check-in with the child at 11:58 p.m. A camera captured Estrada carrying the boy in both during check-in and later checkout. No sedatives were found in toxicology, but detectives noted the child's deep sleep pattern from motel footage contrasted with typical movement. Prosecutors charged Estrada as an adult with first-degree murder, child abuse, and fraudulent schemes and artifices. A tampering count addressed the occupancy sensor harness. Pretrial litigation focused on admissibility of EDR data and the occupant classification readings. The court heard foundational testimony from a crash data retrieval specialist and the vehicle manufacturer's engineer, who explained diagnostic flags and suppression logic in plain terms. The defense argued an unforeseeable mechanical failure and questioned the accuracy of seat weight sensors. The court admitted the data after finding sufficient reliability and a proper chain of custody. Trial commenced in late April 2025. Jurors saw a layered timeline. Traffic camera frames showing repeated loops, motel surveillance of a carried child, and a synchronized display of EDR metrics, throttle, brake, steering angle, leading into the impact pulse. A reconstructionist explained why a true slide on gravel produces asymmetric tire marks, and why the straight, centered strike suggested deliberate aim. A child passenger safety technician demonstrated how routing a shoulder belt behind a booster seat undercuts restraining function and triggers airbag suppression. A claims analyst traced insurance increases, and a recent inquiry Estrada made about time to pay out after accident. The defense called a mechanic who testified that a sticky throttle could cause acceleration, but cross-examination highlighted the wooden wedge and the absence of any diagnostic codes indicating throttle fault. The jury returned guilty verdicts on all primary counts. At sentencing, the court imposed life imprisonment on the murder count with parole eligibility after 25 calendar years under Arizona law, plus concurrent terms of 15 years for child abuse and 10 years for fraudulent schemes. Restitution included funeral costs and an assessment for emergency services response. The court imposed a lifetime prohibition on Estrada contacting the child's mother. A post-trial motion challenging admission of the seat occupancy data was denied. Notice of appeal has been filed, limited to evidentiary issues and sufficiency of proof on premeditation. Estrada is currently housed at the Arizona State Prison Complex Eman under close custody. Department of Corrections records list his earliest parole consideration in the late 2040s, subject to statutory changes. The insurer denied the claim under intentional act exclusions. A civil judgment in favor of the child's estate was entered and will attach to any future income. The frontage road now posts a permanent memorial marker maintained by city crews. A traffic unit added reflective wands at culvert approaches to reduce targeted strikes. The trail that drew its own map. On July 9, 2025, Golden, Colorado witnessed a second-degree murder conviction. Caleb Rhodes, 39, received 48 years for causing his 9-year-old son's fatal fall at Lookout Mountain and staging it as a hiking accident. But how does a dirt path tell investigators who was walking and who was carried? On October 21, 2024, Rhodes called 911 from a turnout along Lookout Mountain Road. He reported a slip from a rock ledge near Windy Saddle Park just before sunset. Jefferson County deputies, mountain rescue, and a flight crew responded. The boy was located below an exposed overlook, beyond the tree line, and pronounced dead at the scene. Rhodes said the child had stepped backward while posing for a photo and vanished. The call time, 5:47 p.m., placed the incident at a busy hour when cyclists and sunset watchers usually crowd the overlook. Yet no bystander reported hearing a shout or seeing a fall. The day's movements began earlier than Rhodes claimed. License plate readers logged his SUV entering the Lariat Loop at 2:14 p.m. A parking meter tap at the pullout near Windy Saddle registered his card at 2:21 p.m. A time-lapse camera by the trailhead captured him starting up the Chimney Gulch Trail at 2:33 p.m. alone. At 3:08 p.m., he returned to the vehicle and sat with the driver door open for 7 minutes. He left again at 3:20, this time with a small backpack. No camera showed the child leaving the car. The dispatch call came more than 2 hours later, when his route tracker app showed him already within yards of cell coverage on the roadway, not at the ledge. Rhodes grew up in Arapahoe County and worked in appliance repair. He had shared custody with the child's mother following a separation. Family court filings showed a pending motion to modify child support and a hearing scheduled for early November. Rhodes was behind on payments. He had recently taken out a supplemental life insurance policy covering his son, naming himself beneficiary. The policy included a double benefit for accidental death and had been approved in late September. He led weekend hikes for friends and posted route maps to a social app. The timeline unraveled under the routine device checks. Investigators obtained a warrant for Rhodes' phone, his public route-sharing accounts, and the child's smartwatch. Rhodes' AllTrails log recorded a loop that did not match the public trail, with a short, unmarked spur leading to the overlook at 4:22 p.m. The spur contained a cluster of GPS points where movement stalled for 6 minutes. The child's smartwatch ceased step counts at 3:48 p.m., while still connected to the SUV's Bluetooth. Its GPS never registered the climb. A shoes-off setting had been toggled in the watch's fitness app earlier that month, but the device still recorded heart rate. That signal flattened at approximately 3:50 p.m. A search of the SUV disclosed a child-sized hiking shoe with clean tread and a small fleece blanket in the cargo area. Scene work added ground truth. A footprint specialist documented adult tread marks leading onto the overlook's outer slab and returning along the same line, with no small prints beyond a shaded switchback below. Soil adhered to Rhodes' boot lugs matched mineral content from the overlook's exposed sandstone shelf. A chalky smear on the slab edge contained fibers consistent with the child's fleece jacket. No scuff marks or microslides typical of a small person scrambling at the lip were present. A cyclist's helmet camera captured Rhodes walking up the road shoulder at 5:44 p.m., with empty hands, not moving from the ledge toward cell coverage as he later said. Photographs on Rhodes' phone of the child at the viewpoint had EXIF times of 2:57 p.m., not near sunset, and barometric data from the phone's sensor showed the device descending in elevation at the moment the images were created, suggesting they were taken from a lower turnout earlier in the day. Digital forensics defined intent. Search history on Rhodes' laptop included how far is Fatal Fall Lookout Mountain, Jefferson County Rescue Response Time, and remove GPS from photo metadata. Messages to a friend discussed beating traffic up the hill by going early, contradicting his claim of a late start. An insurance email confirmed coverage and an active accidental death rider. A convenience store camera in Golden showed Rhodes buying sports tape and instant cold packs at 1:51 p.m. A strip of similar tape, imprinted with dust, was later recovered in his SUV's rear footwell. Prosecutors charged Rhodes as an adult with second-degree murder, child abuse resulting in death, and tampering with physical evidence. Pre-trial litigation centered on admissibility of the smartwatch data and the route tracker logs. Testimony from a device engineer and a geospatial analyst established how the logs are generated, how barometric and GPS data correlate, and why the smartwatch's final readings placed the child in the vehicle. The defense argued an accidental fall and challenged the footprint analysis. The court admitted the evidence, finding sufficient reliability and chain of custody. Trial opened in June 2025. Jurors saw a synchronized timeline. License plate scans, the parking meter tap, the trail camera frames, the all trails route with a pause point at the spur, and the smartwatch's final heart rate graph. A mountain rescue leader explained how typical hiker falls create debris paths, and how the absence of child prints beyond the switchback mattered. The medical examiner discussed blunt force injuries without gratuitous detail, and clarified that the manner of death was homicide due to circumstances, not from unique wound patterns. The prosecution avoided speculative motive and focused on timing, device records, and the lack of child presence on the trail. The jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts. At sentencing, the court imposed 48 years in the Department of Corrections for second-degree murder, with concurrent terms on the remaining counts, and barred contact with the child's mother. Restitution covered rescue costs and counseling services. A notice of appeal challenges admission of the route logs and the footprint testimony. Briefing is pending. Rhodes is currently incarcerated at Sterling Correctional Facility under medium close custody. Department of Corrections records list a projected parole eligibility date in the early 2060s, subject to statutory credits. The lookout now bears a small memorial. County officials installed additional cameras at the trailhead and posted warnings against off-trail approaches to cliff edges, the safe that knew the code. On December 15, 2024, Columbus, Ohio witnessed a guilty verdict. Andre Molina, 35, was convicted of aggravated murder, child endangerment, and evidence tampering for shooting his 13-year-old daughter in their North Linden home and blaming an intruder. But what drove a quiet split level to contradict its owner, with the memory of a keypad and the silence of a door that never opened? On March 10, 2023, Molina called 911 from his living room on Dresden Street at 2:21 a.m., reporting a break-in and shots fired. Patrol officers arrived to find the front door intact, the deadbolt engaged, and a single pane of glass in a rear window cracked from the inside out. Upstairs, his daughter lay in a bedroom. Medics pronounced her dead at the scene. A handgun rested on a hallway table. Molina had a shallow cut on his forearm and faint residue on his hands. He told officers he grabbed his pistol from a safe after hearing a noise, confronted a shadow in the hall, and fired as someone fled through the back. The house disagreed within minutes. A smart lock log showed the front door had remained locked from 9:07 p.m. the prior evening until officers keyed in with a master code. Window sensors recorded no open events overnight. A neighbor's doorbell camera across the alley captured no one entering the yard or the rear porch. The home security hub registered a weapons-safe Bluetooth handshake at 2:14 a.m. and a code entry at 2:14:37 seconds. The safe manufacturer confirmed the model store's timestamps for each unlock. The same hub recorded a motion sensor in the daughter's hallway tripping at 2:16 a.m., followed by a sound event spike captured by an upstairs Wi-Fi camera microphone at 2:17 a.m., which a forensic audio analyst later identified as two close-spaced gunshots inside a small room. Molina grew up in Franklin County and did intermittent warehouse work. He had separated from the child's mother years earlier and had recently lost a custody petition. Records showed mounting debt and a pending wage garnishment. He maintained a home security system and had purchased the biometric keypad safe a year before the shooting. He held no concealed carry license and had completed no formal training. Investigators built a timeline from ordinary devices and physical traces. The safe's internal log, retrieved with a warrant, listed a 4-digit code entry by keypad, not a fingerprint, at 2:14 a.m., unlocking for 10 seconds. The handgun on the hall table matched the safe's registered serial number. The gun's slide bore transfer marks consistent with hurried racking. Ballistics matched both recovered bullets to the handgun with a unique breech face pattern. Gunshot residue swabs of Molina's hands returned positive. Swabs from the rear window latch did not. The cracked window showed glass fragments on the porch below and on the bedroom carpet, inconsistent with a person climbing out. A cut on Molina's arm aligned with a straight blade. Officers found a box cutter with a wet edge in a downstairs utility drawer. No foreign footwear impressions appeared on the kitchen tile. Only Molina's athletic shoe tread matched tracked dust near the hall. Digital evidence closed gaps in motive and planning. Molina's phone contained searches for how to wipe gunshot residue, home invasion Columbus News, and bypassing window sensors during the week prior. A note in his phone listed the safe code. A draft text created at 2:12 a.m. but not sent read, "Someone in the house," time-stamped before the safe unlock. His banking app showed a declined payment on a credit card bill hours earlier. The daughter's phone, recovered from her nightstand, showed sleep mode active and no outgoing messages. A downstairs Wi-Fi camera, motion disabled but always buffering, cached a clip of Molina passing the kitchen at 2:13 a.m., carrying a small box later identified as the safe's backup key pack. The safe's keyway showed fresh tool marks. Prosecutors charged Molina as an adult with aggravated murder with a firearm specification, child endangerment, evidence tampering, and making false alarms. Pretrial motions targeted the smart safe log and the audio clip. The court heard from the safe manufacturer's engineer about timestamp accuracy and log retention. The defense argued hearsay and reliability concerns. The court admitted the data under a business records and machine-generated evidence framework after foundational testimony. The audio analyst explained why the waveform's reflections and interval placed gunfire inside the bedroom. A motion to suppress the smart lock records failed. The warrant was deemed particular and supported by probable cause. Trial began in November 2024. Jurors saw a composite chart. Safe unlock at 2:14:37. Camera buffer showing Molina in the kitchen a minute earlier. Hallway motion at 2:16. Audio spike at 2:17. And officer arrival at 2:24. A crime scene technician demonstrated how undisturbed dust on the sill and untriggered sensor logs refuted an exit through the rear window. A firearms examiner matched test shots to cartridge casings found under the bed. The medical examiner testified in measured terms to proximity indicators on the gunshot wounds without gratuitous detail, noting features consistent with close-range fire. The defense proposed a fleeing intruder and a misfired struggle. Cross-examination highlighted the unbroken lock history and the absence of unknown DNA. The jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts. At sentencing, the court imposed life imprisonment with parole eligibility after 30 years on the aggravated murder count, plus a mandatory 3-year firearm specification to be served prior to the life term. Concurrent terms were imposed on the remaining counts. Restitution included funeral costs and emergency response fees. A notice of appeal challenges admission of the safe and smart lock logs and argues ineffective assistance of counsel on ballistics cross-examination. Briefing is underway. Molina is currently incarcerated at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution under close security. The Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction lists his first parole hearing date in the mid-2050s, subject to statutory changes. The house on Dresden Street was sold at auction. The security vendor issued a bulletin to law enforcement describing how to lawfully retrieve SmartSafe logs in future investigations.